So today we're going to deal with one of the most powerful influences in jazz, and particularly the tenor saxophone. Born in 1923 in LA, as a matter of fact. Not a whole lot of jazz musicians were born out there in those days, but that's where he was born. And he ended up being there because, let's just say, he was a member of a very esteemed family. His father, Dr. Frank Gordon, was a graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C., and a dentist, and one of the first black doctors in all of LA. So this is very high society family. His mother was a daughter of a gentleman who was one of only 5 African Americans to receive a Congressional Medal of Honor for their participation in the Spanish-American War. So let's just say he came from a very, very good stock. And he was afforded all of the niceties and advantages that any American could have, black or white, in the 20s and 30s. He grew up like most kids would, with that kind of a, economic advantage. Went to fine schools and began to study music at a fairly early age, in his early teens, primarily the clarinet, at least for the first 2 or 3 years of his musical activities. And then he switched to the alto saxophone and eventually to the tenor saxophone. Now, I need to try to tell you, alto is a small instrument, you know, and the tenor is probably about like this. And Dexter probably went from the alto to the tenor because Dexter himself was called the gentle giant. Great personality, very light guy, but intimidating. And some people call him Long Tall Dexter because he stood 6'6". Yeah, he's a big man, big man. And if I remember seeing him in a movie we'll talk about a little bit later, around midnight, he was quite knock-kneed too. He had a very distinctive walk. Dex was a bad cat. And having the advantages he had and the discipline of a very well-educated family and whatnot, he progressed very, very quickly on the woodwinds. And early in his life, after high school, whatever, he found himself in Lionel Hampton's band. And Lionel Hampton had one of the hottest bands, man. You got Marshall Royal on sax, you got Illinois Jacquet. I mean, you already got the baddest, hottest saxophone players around. Everybody is want to be in Hamp's band because Hamp had a fired-up band. So here this young kid is starting his career with one of the hottest bands on the planet. Yeah. So he's touring and doing this and doing that, and as things go on, he moves from Hamp's band to Fletcher Henderson's band. You know, Fletcher Henderson was kind of the grandpa of the whole big band era. And so he went back to get close to the roots and get some real deep education about what you're doing in that big swing band kind of thing. He left there and went to Louis Armstrong's band. So he'd go even further and deeper into the legacy and history and tradition of this music. He started here, but then he started working backwards through this music before he could go forward. Now the funny thing is, he went from Louis Armstrong band to Billy Eckstine's band. Now, Louis was doing, you know, kind of pop, kind of New Orleans, kind of bluesy kind of tunes. And Billy Eckstine's band, man, you had Charlie Parker in there, you had Diz in there, you had Miles in there, you had cats that were going to be the cats to launch this bebop era in just a few years. So this was a very edgy, fiery, inventive band. And that's where he ended up. Woo! Yeah, and with all the cats that were in the band, it kind of set him with his, let's just say, network. That's a word we like to use in business. My network. He got a heck of a network going on. And toward the late 40s into the 50s, he was recording with everybody from, Ben Webster, Tad Dameron, some of the baddest cats in jazz. Now, and he was also, because of the platform he had in the X-Time band, he was also starting to influence the next generation of great jazz tenor saxophone players. His chief, how should I say, model of what a jazz tenor sax ought to be was, of course, Lester Young, Prez. But then Dexter was the template for cats like John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. When those cats started playing, they looked to Dexter with his big, fat sound and the way he could play behind the beat, give it that real bluesy, jazzy, laid-back kind of thing that, you gotta be able to play behind that beat a little bit, never rushing it, just laying it back, baby, laying it back, ready to cut. Dex was great at that. So both John and Sonny picked that up, the big sound. They both had big sounds like Dexter. They both played a little bit behind the beat. They both could play some bluesy stuff. And they both played very logical improvisations, which is what Dexter did as well. He could play with the best of them, but he never just did things to get audience applause. He wanted to communicate to the audience heart, which brings us to one of his unusual habits. He would never play a ballad on a live gig without first walking to the microphone and reciting the lyrics. Yeah. And I'm sure if it was a love song, he'd find some young lady in the audience and kind of read them to her. 6'7", good-looking guy reading portrait to a young lady. That's very, very effective. It makes her real happy because all the other ladies jealous in the room, so now you already got some excitement. By the time he starts to play, it's just icing on the cake. That is what he did. And the funny thing is, 50 years later, Sonny Rollins is still doing the same thing. So Dexter influenced cats not just in the way they play, but also the mannerisms, how you connect with the audience, how you actually create your solos and develop them, etc. Dex was all about expanding the harmony and doing great melodic things, but never tricks, and always swinging, baby. Always swinging, and always playing with that big old fat open sound. And that was his trademark. Now, Dexter's doing great, playing with everybody, recording. He's a side man, never lead a sad man. I'll play with this cat, I'll play with this cat, I'll play with that cat. So he's on a whole lot of recordings during the bebop era. Unfortunately, in the 50s, Dex fell victim to a weakness that a lot of jazz musicians had about that time, which was heroin addiction. Heroin addiction. And in those days, they put you in prison. Yeah, they put you in prison. Especially if you're a black jazz musician. You definitely go into prison. Ask Billie Holiday. I'm sure you've seen the movie. Yeah, ask Billie Holiday. And the same thing that happened to Billie Holiday happened to Dexter, except for one thing, which we will deal with in just a short while. Anyway, Dex got this habit, and so now he's not recording so much anymore, and he ain't playing so much anymore, because between the time he's in and out of jail He's out there too busy trying to find his fix. So Dexter declines. And it is during this period of decline that, like Miles, when he was in the same situation, his father, who like Dexter's father, was also a dentist, which means well-educated and well-financed, is sent for his son. Man, we got to get you out of there. Come on back to LA. Let us give you another start. And that's what Dex did. Miles, as you know, he went back to Alton, Illinois, East St. Louis with his father in order to try to clean himself up. Now, evidently, that worked for Dexter better the first time than it worked for Miles the first time. Miles was a little stubborn about what he thought he wanted to do. But Dex got cleaned up pretty good. Took a few years in and out of prison and this and that. But the other thing that happens when you get these convictions, like Billie Holiday, is that they take your cabaret card. Yeah, which means you cannot perform in places that sell alcohol anywhere in New York. So at the point that he had this addiction, at the point that he doesn't have a great output, he also can't get any work in and around the city. So that was another reason to send him back home to clean up and to restart his career, and that is what he did. And he started playing on the West Coast. You know, cats like Gerald Wilson and cats like that started to come up, and Chico Hamilton, cats like that. So he was part of that West Coast thing for a while. But when people heard that Dex was clean again, he started sneaking into New York. I did say sneaking now, because he wasn't supposed to be there. He ain't got no key, he ain't got no cabaret card. So he would sneak in and play this little thing and then go back. And he'd sneak in and play this little thing and go back. And he'd sneak in and play this thing and go back. And soon, I guess, the politics around New York changed, or whatever, maybe an office changed or officer changed, who knows? He got his cabaret card back. So now he figures, okay, we'll do a little bit of New York. But about the same time, there's another explosion in his career. People from across the big pond are starting to go, who is this Dexter Gordon? Oh yeah. So now you got people all over Europe, from Denmark and France and England and Italy and Switzerland. They all want to see this gentle giant. So now Dex is going back and forth, back and forth. And finally he goes, you know what? I like Europe. Yeah, I like Europe a lot. Number one, I don't feel all this racism. Yeah, I don't feel all this hatred. The other thing is, there's a lot more respect for jazz musicians. You got to understand, and this is the rock and roll era, and blah, 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 and the fusion thing is coming up, Weather Report, and, you know, Chick Corea returning forever, and all that. That's what's happening right now. And cats that are playing acoustic jazz, they're like museum pieces. So Europeans were quite different. They respected that acoustic, straight ahead jazz swing. He ended up living in New York for quite some time and hanging out with other American jazz musicians who had chosen to relocate for the same reason that Dexter did. His biggest partner was the pianist, Kenny Drew. And I have to mention that Kenny Drew's son, Kenny Drew Jr., lived in this community for a lot of years. And if any of you who live here did not get a chance to see Kenny Drew Jr. when he walked and played locally, I feel sorry for you, because there'll never be anything like him. And his father was even more. And this collaboration between Kenny Drew Sr. and Dexter Gordon is one of the most special relationships both in terms of their personalities and their value system and their music that we've ever seen. You know, kind of like Miles and Red or like Train and McCoy. It was that kind of a marriage of spirits and music. And then there's always Kenny Clark, who was there, you know, holding down the swing. And they generally use European bass players, you know, Lars Peterson or someone like that, very, very, very capable bass players, given the classical orchestra's, how should I say this, control of a string performance and education all over Europe. So these bass players were very, very well trained, and once they learned to swing and create the bass lines, we even jazz, they're just fine. So some of these recordings from Europe are like some of the most special things that you will ever find Dexter Gordon on. So he continues to do this, and finally, he was convinced, man, it ain't so bad as it was in the late 60s and the early 70s. You can actually, things are getting better. It's probably around 75, 76, things are getting a little bit better. You should come on back home, baby. You should come on back home. And he did. I think the Village Vanguard, somewhere around 76, he did a concert there, welcoming Dexter back home, called The Homecoming. And I think this was recorded by Columbia Records. And so you can go out and hear what Dexter was like when he came back for his homecoming. His biggest supporter at that time, as it turns out, was Art Blakey. Because Art Blakey was one of the last jazz musicians who wasn't trying to add an electric bass or trying to add an electric keyboard or a synthesizer to kind of modernize his music. Oh no, he was trying to keep that swing happening, baby. He was trying to keep it acoustic, baby. He was trying to keep it natural jazz. And when Dexter showed back up, he had reinforcements. And Dexter's personality and the way he gets along with audiences and just the passion of his music and all of that, this was a great partnership. Art Blakey wanted Dexter to stay here, and Dexter did, and the two of them, with a few others, they kind of launched this resurgence of acoustic jazz, where you got to plug yourself in to play. Yeah, so that's what's going on with Dexter. And then album after album after album after album after album. His 1962 Go is actually listed in the Library of Congress as one of the significant works of art ever produced. I remember in the early 70s, I had this friend who lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was a sax player that played organ, Jack Todd. I remember him convincing me that his blindness was not a handicap. My sight was a handicap because I am the one that needed a light, not him. I would never forget that lesson. But the other lesson was, I had an album that was called Dexter Gordon, The Cat. Couldn't find it anywhere. Dexter's in his black and a little fedora and the whole shot looking all cool. But I did find an album called Dexter Gordon, The Panther. So I get the feeling that the album I had was an earlier version of The Panther. At any rate, my friend Jack Todd begged me, pleaded with me to give him that Dexter Gordon album. He loved Dexter. And so we made a deal. He gave me the Lion Liston Smith and Woody Shaw and Joe Henderson, who I love, Tony Williams recording of Unity, or Elvin Jones recording of Unity, and I gave him The Cat. And he was happy and I was happy because I wasn't feeling Dexter like he was at that time. Dexter grew on me. He was definitely an acquired taste, and because he was so understated and so gentle in his demeanor and personality and delivery, a young guy in 21, 22, 23, he was not quite attractive. It's like a Joe Henderson who was burning all kind of Coltrane licks and all that. So this is who Dexter was, okay? Numerous awards, Grammy nominations and the whole thing, but surprisingly, his biggest achievement is not his playing. He was asked to portray a character in a movie called Round Midnight. It was a French movie with American expatriate musicians living in Paris. And it was a personality that had been created through real jazz musicians that had actually lived in Paris, and they kind of put their lives together and created this fictional character that Dexter played. And because he was a jazz musician and because he had lived in Europe for over a decade, it wasn't acting. He was so natural and so effective. If you haven't seen Round Midnight 1986, go see it. He was nominated for an Academy Award. That's right. First movie, 1986, boom, Dexter blows everybody out of the water. He didn't win it, but just the fact that he got nominated. And then he did a soundtrack from the movie. People like John McCaughan and Tony Williams and Wayne Shorter may be in there. And, you know, great album. French musician mixed in, as it would have been in this period. And just so much real jazz. I recommend this movie above all others about jazz. And Dexter released a soundtrack. It's called The Other Side of Round Midnight. In other words, here's the video, here's your movie, now here's just the music, baby. And they added a couple of extra tunes, but it's pretty much the music from the movie, and all of that music was done live by live jazz musicians. No buttons and stuff, creating electronic whatever, none of that. It's all natural. The only electronic thing in there is John McLaughlin's electric guitar. So it's funny, all this music, all these years, and his biggest acclaim comes from his acting in that one movie, and then he is recognized with the Grammy for the soundtrack. What a career. He's been recognized by National Endowment for the Arts, so Jazz Master. His stuff is in the Library of Congress. Our Congress has actually proclaimed a Dexter Gordon Day in DC. Some people realize what a great treasure Dexter Gordon was. And perhaps there are many of you out there who don't know Dexter's music, like I didn't realize it when I was a young man at 22, 23 years of age. My suggestion to you is go back. The 1962 album Go has been re-released, and it received a Grammy in the remastered, re-released version. You might just start with that. Just start with Go, and then work through this extraordinary body of work of this 6'6" gentle giant that started out with a silver spoon in his mouth, could have been a doctor, lawyer, surgeon, anything, but he chose to be a musician and a jazz musician, and one of the most important jazz musicians that this country has ever produced. And he is as well known on this side of the big pond as he is on the other. Ladies and gentlemen, Dexter Clark Gordon, born 1923, Los Angeles, California. Thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting and informative. Let's go!